This video has been a long time coming. Hello everyone, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Lily and today's video is going to be a little bit different, probably quite long. I would suggest getting some tea, getting some snacks. We're gonna dive into this. So you may or may not be aware that at the moment I am currently hosting a Hunger Games read-along along with some other booktubers, Peyton, Avery and Emma. We are reading one book a month in preparation for The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes that is coming out on the 19th of May. In February we read the first book and the live show for that should be up by the time that this video goes up, so I will link that down below if you would like to go and check that out, check out some of our thoughts on the book. But today we are talking about the movie adaptation, because for the first time really I have decided to read the books and then as soon as I can go and watch the movie adaptations. Although I have read the books a lot of times, I think this was my 9th reread of the first book, and I have watched the movies countless times if you factor in the amount of times I have seen the scenes from making GIFs on Tumblr for a number of years. Like, I know these books and these films really well, but I've never actually sat down and read the books and then watched the film immediately afterwards, just because that's not what I tend to do with adaptations. I try and give them a fair shot, and to me giving them a fair shot is not reading the book immediately before, because then I will spend the whole movie nitpicking. But this video requires nitpicking, and so that is exactly what I did. So as you may be able to tell from the title, this video is going to be how the Hunger Games that came out in 2012, directed by Gary Ross, pretty much messed up Peeta Mellark's character, and why I think that is important in terms of this movie being an adaptation of the story of the books. Now, I will probably be doing a number of disclaimers throughout this video, but there are two main disclaimers I need to make when I'm doing this video. The first of which is that I am not a film critic. I don't know much about movies, and I don't know much about movie criticism. I'm definitely coming at this from a huge fan of the books perspective. I'm not trying to come at this from like a film critic's perspective. And also I would like to disclaim that yes, I do know that this adaptation is marginally better than the majority of YA movie adaptations. However, I am a Scorpio and I'm very petty, so before I get into the main topic at hand, which is the kind of mischaracterization of Peeta Mellark, I just want to discuss a couple of things that do irk me about the film otherwise, because although I do recognise this is a very good adaptation, this is actually my least favourite of the Hunger Games films, which I think is like a controversial opinion. People don't like the Mockingjay films and I don't know why. They're really accurate to the books, but I guess it's because people don't really like that book, so people don't like the Mockingjay films. I think a lot of what I have issue with this film probably comes slightly down to budgeting and then just a few directorial choices as well. Like, I know the reason behind one of my main issues with the film is probably the budget, and that is the costumes for the Trippy Parade and Katniss's interview. They're just like not very impressive, and they definitely haven't aged well, but I remember watching the film and not thinking that they were very impressive in 2012, and they've only got worse as time has gone on. I just don't think they're anything like the books, which they don't have to be, but they also should be still as impressive as they sound in the books. I know they had a limited budget, but I just think that they're quite lackluster and they're just not great. I just feel like whatever budget was put into this film, the costume department didn't get it, or they just made some choices that I personally didn't like. The shaky cam, it was a choice. It was definitely a choice. And I do actually think the shaky cam works well in some scenes, like in the cornucopia scene. I think that it really portrays the chaoticness of that scene and really portrays like the fear and what it would be like to be in that situation. However, some scenes it is unnecessary. For example, the reaping scene, I guess you could argue it was also going for a similar effect of portraying like how nervous Katniss is feeling and scared and everything like that. But there is a literal jump cut in the middle of her volunteering for her sister. I am not joking. This film made like $300 million and there is a literal jump cut in the middle of like the most pivotal scene of the film, and it really aggravates me to this day. It is so bad and I don't know who let that slide. That is mostly it for other things about the film that kind of slightly irk me. I do have an issue with the ending, but to be honest, that all kind of ties in to Peeta's character, so let's talk about it. Let's talk about Peeta Mellark. So I would argue that Peeta, after Katniss, is the next most important character in the series. He is the most mentioned, other than Katniss in the series, like by far. He drives a lot of the plot, like a lot of his actions directly drive the plot, like his announcement about being in love with Katniss in the first book, his announcement about the baby in the second book, a lot of what he does in Mockingjay, it drives the plot forward, and a lot of it is in relation to his relationship with Katniss. But that is my point. It's that whether you ship it romantically, whether you see it as romantic, like however you feel about Katniss and Peeta's relationship, that is not what this video is about. I would argue their relationship is really central to driving the plot of this entire trilogy forward. And I feel like some people are going to be like, you're misunderstanding it, it's about Katniss's relationship with Prim and Rue. And that is so true. That is so true. Katniss's relationship with Prim and Rue also completely drives the plot along, but so does her relationship with Peeta. The two things can exist at the same time. Anyway, I would definitely argue that Peeta's relationship with Katniss like is very much a focal point of the last third of this story and the climax of the story of the first book. Like literally them not being able to both win is what drives them to hold out the berries that then drives forward the plot of the next two books. So that is why I feel like it is important that Peeta's character is portrayed correctly in the films and is portrayed as it is in the books. And I'm here to argue that it isn't. In the books, Peeta is many things. He's a really complex, layered character that becomes more fleshed out as the series goes on. But even in the first book, he is still a really complex character. He is sweet, he is kind, and he is gentle. Those are all very true of him in the books. But in the books, he is also really witty. He's really charming. He's really funny. Like, he's really sarcastic and has this self-deprecating kind of humor for himself. And there's a lot of implications throughout the first and second book that he comes from a difficult home where he is hit for burning bread, where his mother calls him a stupid creature. And I definitely think you can see the impact of that home environment upon his character. He's also really politically savvy and really good at manipulating people and just really smart, and also definitely has a disdain for the capital. I think there's this idea that Peeta is like very anti-revolution, and I don't think that's true at all. I think he's just anti-violence. But I do think that he is critical of the capital more than people give him credit for in the books. Because in the movie, of all of those traits I just listed, he's kind of just the first three, which, if you don't remember, are soft, gentle, and kind. Those are kind of just the three. And a little bit creepy. We're gonna get into that. He's a little bit creepy in the film, to be honest. So I am basically gonna break down a lot of different scenes between the book and the film where I think that he differs. So strap yourselves in. Before I get into the scenes where I think he differs, I do think it's important for me to just highlight that I do think there are a couple of scenes in the first film where I always say book Peeta, he kind of pops out, he makes an appearance, and then he goes back in again. So one of those scenes is the scene where he's wearing this weird sweater thing that I thought was a dressing gown for a good year, and it's the scene where he and Katniss are bigging up each other's skills in front of Haymitch, and this scene is pretty much a scene from the book, and the lines are pretty much the dialogue from the book, which is why I think he pretty much feels like book Peeta. I like this scene in particular because we see Peeta losing his cool a little bit and getting a bit heated and a bit angry at things, because he is angry in the books. That is something about Peeta's character that often gets forgotten, that yes, he is very kind and he is calm and gentle in a lot of situations where Katniss isn't, but he also does get angry, and often angry about things that Katniss doesn't always get angry at herself or she doesn't understand. And I think that's a really important part of his character. And again, just a part of his character that makes him a more three-dimensional, real person. The second scene, again, is almost word for word from the books, which is why I think book Peeta kind of emerges in this scene, as I like to call it, and that is the interview scene with Caesar Flickerman. It's pretty much the lines that are from the book, slightly tweaked in places, but pretty much the same, and I really enjoy that scene because I do feel like it's actually the Peeta from the books. As soon as he leaves the stage, he's gone again, but, you know, on stage, he's there. There's also finally a small moment in the arena. Katniss and him have left the cave, they're going hunting, and he jokes with Katniss that he's gonna take the bow.
Okay, I'll take the bow. I'm just kidding. I'll go pick some stuff.
And although that scene plays very differently in the books, they're actually sniping at each other a lot more in the book. That is very much a thing that book Peeta, I think, would do. Like, he has a very self-deprecating kind of humour and likes to poke fun at himself, so I do enjoy that moment. Other than that, I do think he is quite a different character in the film, and I do think for the first part of the film, you probably only notice if you're a bit of a nerd like me and like closely read the book and then closely watch the film and have spent years like analysing it through GIFs and stuff. The first time we really see him be different is on the train in the Capitol. That's the first time you really see Peeta's character other than at the Reaping. And there's a scene that is changed slightly, and I do think that it then changes the perception of Peeta. So in the book, Peeta and Katniss are trying to get Haymitch to come around. They're trying to like get his advice for things, and Haymitch is being very dismissive of them and is just saying, you know, like, I don't care, do what you want, I'm gonna go drink. And Peeta gets really angry at this in the book, and in fact it is Peeta who swipes Haymitch's glass out of his hand, and then Haymitch punches Peeta in the face and Katniss stabs the table as a reaction to all of this. After this has happened, Haymitch kind of takes stock of them, makes them stand in the middle of the room, and basically they come to an agreement that he is going to help them as much as possible. They have to listen to everything that he says, and in return he'll try not to drink and he will try to help them. We know that Haymitch definitely does favour Katniss in general, but at this point he doesn't really know them and is taking stock of both of them, and it is actually Peeta's initial reaction to swiping the glass out of the hand that makes Haymitch take notice. He definitely obviously takes note of Katniss also stabbing the table, but it's Peeta who initiates this, and it's his anger and his frustration that initiates this. In the film, a similar scene plays out, but Peeta doesn't really participate in it. He's in the scene, but he's just kind of sitting by, and it's Katniss who just stabs the table at Haymitch. There's no altercation between Peeta and Haymitch, and that is kind of what makes Haymitch kind of take note, although really it's just Effie making a comment about mahogany.
That is mahogany!
But it's very much focused on Haymitch and Katniss's character, and it's not focused on the three of them. And like, this is fine, and it's something I'm sure most people haven't even noted, but for me it just really focuses, you know, the attention on Katniss. And I know she's our main character, and don't get me wrong, I love Katniss Everdeen with my whole heart. Like, she is my favourite fictional character of all time, but by leaving that kind of part of Peeta's character out, you're leaving out the part of him that is angry and is frustrated at the situation. He is not this perfect angel who is constantly calm about what he's going through. He's a 16-year-old boy who is scared, and I think it's perfectly natural that he'd be angry. Also on the train, and it's a slight difference, and I don't really know if it makes a big difference, but it is just something I thought I would mention. When they're on the train and Peeta is waving to all the people in the Capitol, a line is handed off to Haymitch that was originally his line in the book. So in the book he's waving, Katniss starts to wave, and then she kind of feels a bit disgusted with herself and kind of steps back, and Peeta notices and kind of turns around to her and is like, well, they might be rich, I might as well. Which I think shows Peeta's like political thinking, and he is thinking about strategy, and he is really smart and cunning in that way. In the film, this line is handed off to Haymitch, and Haymitch says,
He knows what he's doing.
but Peeta doesn't turn around and acknowledge this at all. He just carries on waving and smiling and kind of looking a bit doe-eyed about the Capitol. And I guess you could definitely take this at face value, and maybe he does know what he's doing, but I think you can also interpret it as Haymitch maybe giving him too much credit and Peeta just being like amazed by the Capitol. Maybe I'm reading too much into this scene. Another thing that gets handed off actually to Peeta's character that I think changes things slightly is it during the Trippy Parade. In the book, the way this plays out is that Peeta and Katniss both kind of come out in their costumes and they see each other, and they're both like not super happy about this, and they're kind of a bit like, what is going on? We're about to be set on fire, I don't know how I feel about this. And they like have a few jokey comments with each other, like, I'll rip off your cape if you rip off mine, like, I don't know how I'm feeling about this. And then they get into the chariot, they light the costumes, and Cinna basically kind of motions for them to hold hands, and they're a bit like, okay, I don't really know about this, but then they decide to hold hands. Whilst they're on the parade, we don't really get an insight into how Peeta is reacting, but Katniss kind of is realizing how great she looks, and she kind of almost kind of falls into it for a bit, and she is like waving and blowing kisses, and she's not the Katniss that we know who's very like sullen. She definitely gets into the role of performing to the Capitol audience. In the film, Peeta basically tries to grab Katniss's hand. There is no reason that he does this, he just decides to grab her hand, which is a choice. It's a choice. And she kind of like takes her hand away and is like, what are you doing? And he's like, come on, the audience will love it. And then she's kind of like rolls her eyes and is like, okay, fine. And then they do it, and she's kind of like, oh yeah, they really like it. And I think what they were trying to go for is that Peeta is like really smart in coming up with this idea of holding hands to kind of get the audience on their side and kind of make it a spectacle. But they don't really back that up at any point. There's no point where Peeta's like, oh yeah, that really worked, or anything like that. So I think they kind of missed a trick there, and I think it can be read by people, especially if they haven't read the books, that he was just like kind of wanted to hold her hand, and he's really doe-eyed again in the scene with the Capitol, and really like wide-eyed and amazed by it all. And I just don't get that vibe from him as much in the books. He may have been, Katniss doesn't really know what Peeta's doing in the chariot, but in the book he is definitely a lot more cynical with the Capitol. And I'll give you an example from a scene in the book. This scene is also not in the film because it's kind of tied to the Avox subplot, and the Avox subplot is cut from the film. So basically, long story short, Katniss recognises an Avox, Peeta covers for her because she's not meant to be able to recognise an Avox, and then he takes her up to the rooftop and he basically demands an explanation from her. He just wants to know like how she knows her, because he covered for her and she kind of owes him that. Whilst they're talking about this Avox and how she saw her, you know, she notes that she thinks that the Avox is from the Capitol. She kind of comments that she doesn't understand why the Avox would ever leave the Capitol with, you know, its luxury and its opulence and its constant supply of food. And Peeta just makes a small comment where he says, I'd leave here, and Katniss notes that he says it in a way that is kind of critical of the Capitol, and then Peeta notes what he said and that there's probably, you know, cameras and microphones watching them, and he saves himself from that moment. He kind of has a moment where he realises and then saves himself. And that scene in general, like that whole section, just adds so much to Peeta's character. In that scene you get like a discussion of his family and how his dad kind of wanted a daughter. You get him making a comment about the Capitol and showing his cynicism towards the Capitol, and then realising that he's probably being watched and changing his tune so that it doesn't come across as rebel talk or anything like that. And again, I understand why that scene and that subplot was cut from the film, but we don't get anything that shows that at all in the film. So all of the things I've mentioned up until this point are pretty small, and like this may just be things that I'm perceiving and I'm like reading into too much. You may disagree with me, like please let me know. But I do think like a really tangible big scene that is changed and thus changes the way that Peeta's character comes across in the film is the rooftop scene. And obviously there are a couple of scenes on the rooftop, but by the rooftop scene I mean the scene after the interviews where Peeta has revealed that he has a crush on Katniss and him and Katniss have a chat the night before the games. The book and film start off very similarly. Katniss wakes up, she can't sleep, she goes to the rooftop, she finds Peeta there, they start talking about stuff, and Peeta starts talking about the fact that he doesn't want them to change him in the arena and he wants to die himself, which when you think about Mockingjay, it's really sad. Anyway, Katniss's response to this little spiel actually changes from the book to the film, and this changes the conversation entirely. So in the film, Peeta has this whole spiel about not wanting to change himself, and Katniss kind of thinks about it, and then she's like, well, I can't afford to think like that, I've got my sister to think about. And then Peeta basically is like, yeah, I know, and then they kind of smile at each other and flirt with each other, which is weird, given that, you know, they're gonna have to potentially like kill each other the next day. I don't know, it just feels a little bit off. In the book, Katniss, when Peeta has this whole spiel, is like, why are you thinking about this? And she like questions his thinking. She's like, why are you thinking about this? What has driven this? And she challenges him on it, and he challenges her back. And at one point during this kind of challenging process, Katniss gets kind of annoyed at him and is like, well, you should just focus on staying alive. Like, I don't know why you're having this whole moral dilemma, like we're about to go into an arena and potentially be killed. And then Peeta responds to her saying this like with, oh, thanks for the tip, sweetheart. And they basically don't leave on good terms in the book. Katniss storms off because she's annoyed at him and he's annoyed at her, and that's how they leave off. And I really like the book version of that scene, and I like that they challenge each other. I like that this scene actually shows like their different ways of thinking at this point in the story. It shows like how far they come, I guess, as you get to Catching Fire and Mockingjay. And I also just like that in this scene Peeta isn't just kind of like going along with whatever she says because he has a crush on her. He does have a crush on her, and I think that's really clear, but it's also clear that he doesn't like view her as this like perfect person. Like, he does challenge her when he disagrees with her, and I think that's a really important point for his character. I think it's a lot healthier. It means he doesn't come across as creepy as he does in the film, and I just personally prefer that portrayal. We then don't really see much of Peeta as the book and the film go on because they're in the games and Katniss and Peeta like go on different alliances and stuff like that. We don't really see much of him again until the announcement that says that two tributes, if they're from the same district, can potentially win the games. And something that I really picked up on when, you know, reading the book and then immediately watching the film was how much shorter the last bit of the film is compared to what that section contains in the book. So in the book, when the announcement is made, it's made 2/3 of the way through the book. The books, if you don't know, are split up into a 3-act structure really evenly. There's 9 chapters per part, 3 parts to the book, and the announcement comes at the end of part 2. So you have a good third of the book. I don't know how each part compares in terms of page numbers, but I do feel like it's a fairly even split. Whereas the announcement in the film adaptation comes an hour and 45 minutes into a 2-hour, 15-minute film. So the last third of the book is basically crammed into the last half hour of the film, and this is like the part of the book that Peeta features the most in. And again, as I said, because their relationship is so pivotal to the climax of the story, you'd think they'd give time to it, to build it up, and give time to show it. But I guess they like wrote the first 2/3 of the book into the script, and then they were like, oh shit, it's gonna be too long, we've got to cram everything in at the end. And you can definitely tell that they had to cram. From the moment that Katniss finds Peeta by the river, everything is different from the book to the film. In the book, Katniss finds Peeta because he calls out to her, he says, "You here to finish me off, sweetheart?" which is such a book Peeta line. I love him so much. And then he's like, well, don't step on me, and she basically finds him because he opens his eyes and smiles in the mud, and then she basically, you know, tries to roll him over, tries to kind of assess the situation, and throughout this whole bit by the river, they kind of talk a little bit to each other, but they're mostly kind of joking, and Peter's kind of flirting with her, and he's also kind of making fun of the fact that she's quite squeamish, and she's kind of getting frustrated with him, and that's like their dynamic in the book. He's quite flirty and funny with her and like pokes fun at her, and she gets a bit frustrated, but she also like does feel an endurance to him, and that's their dynamic in the book. In the film, he grabs her leg. For some reason, movie Peeta likes to grab Katniss, and I don't know where that came from because he doesn't really do that in the book at all. He grabs her and then he looks like this. Gary Ross, I just want to talk. In the film, their conversation by the river is a lot more serious. Peeta is very, very serious, and I get it. They were trying to, like, get across that he was really ill, that he thought he was gonna die. I get it, but he's very serious. It's the same situation in the book, but Peeta just makes fun of it, and he's like, oh, I'm probably gonna die. Come on, Dr. Everdeen, what are we gonna do? And that's, like, what he's like. He uses self-deprecation, and he uses his humour to cope with traumatic things. That's clearly the kind of person that Peeta is. And I just don't like that change. I think it makes him a lot more of a dimensional and fun character when he's a lot more humorous about stuff like that. The whole cave sequence is completely condensed, so in the book it takes up about 4 to 5 chapters, which works out at about 70 pages of a book that is 450 pages, at least in my edition. And in the film, it's about 10 minutes total, I believe. And I haven't noted it down here, so I can't even tell you if it's 10 minutes, including her going to the feast and fighting Clove or not. But it's about 10 minutes in the cave, out of a film that is 2 hours and 15 minutes, compared to 70 pages out of 450 pages. There is clearly a difference in the time that was given to these scenes. And again, I get it. They didn't want to amp up, you know, the romantic part of this story. They wanted it to be taken seriously, and in 2012, if they'd included too much romance, then it would have been compared to Twilight, which it was already being compared to Twilight, and they wanted critics to like it, but also they didn't change the fact that the story still hinges on their relationship, so I don't know what they were going for. They definitely switched things around. So Peeta confesses, like, when he started having a crush on Katniss in the book, after he's been ill and been recovered, and kind of as she's recovering, and she asks him, you know, oh, when did you start having a crush on me? She's kind of doing this for the audience, and he explains the story to her, and the story is pretty similar, but in the film, this story comes out while he is still ill. She doesn't ask for it. No one asks for it. He just starts spouting it, I guess because he's meant to be ill and kind of feverish, and is just, like, saying things. And it's pretty much the same up until the end of the story. So in the book he just says, oh, you sang and I knew, like, my father that I was going to be a goner. Katniss says something like, oh, you have a remarkable memory, and then he says, like, one of Peter's classic book cheesy lines where he's like, I remember everything about you, you're the one who wasn't paying attention. And, like, it's so cheesy, but I still kind of love him even when he does stuff like that. But it's, like, cheesy and kind of unbearably romantic, but it's not, like, creepy. In the film, instead of just saying, oh, I was a goner, he's like, I watched you going home every day. And then to make matters worse, he emphasizes every day.
Every day.
And it's really, really creepy and really weird. And Katniss is clearly like, the fuck? And, like, who wrote that? Who thought that was romantic? Who? In the book as well, Katniss gets a lot more seriously hurt at the feast. The feast is pretty much the same in the book and the film, but in the film she kind of gets a cut to her head, and then he comes home and the same medicine that fixes Peter's blood poisoning, which is just like a gel, fixes her, like, thing on her scar, whereas in the book he requires, like, a really, like, high level injection. In the book she does get a cut to her forehead, but it's, like, bleeding a lot more, and she notes that as she gets to the cave she passes out, and, like, Peeta says that he found her in a pool of blood when he woke up, and so she does spend about a day recovering. It's not the same amount of time that Peeta was ill for and the amount of time that she was taking care of him, but there's still a section of that cave sequence where the tables are turned, and rather than Katniss taking care of Peeta, Peeta takes care of Katniss for a little bit, and I, again, think that's really important. There's definitely a whole lot of people who've only seen the films who are like, all she does is take care of him and protect him and he doesn't do anything, and, like, that's true. He just puts it on her and she's magically better the next day, and so is he. And that's all he does, whereas he actually, like, takes care of her for a day in the book. And I think that that's important because for me, like, why I like their relationship personally is that they're always pretty much presented on equal footing, and although they have different skills, those skills are presented to be still really valuable. Like, both of them have their valuable assets to them. Things that also got cut from the cave scene, like, in general, most of the kissing, which, like, is neither here nor there. I guess I kind of got it because they didn't want them to be making out as much as they do in the book, but they make out a lot in the book. There's, like, one kiss, and then I think there's a kiss on the cheek, and that's like it. I guess they didn't want it to be too over the top. That was kind of the point. Anyway, there's this bit in the cave scene where Katniss, when Peeta's sick, is telling him a story of how she bought Prim's goat, which again, the goat was cut from the film, so I guess they had to cut this. And I do get it. They probably didn't think that the film audience wanted to watch Katniss just telling Peeta a story of how she got a goat. But I really like that bit because it's them bonding and like opening up to each other and stuff. And even though she is kind of admitting certain things because like she's on camera and can't admit that she had been hunting, it's still a nice scene. A full conversation about the bread and owing people, Katniss being vulnerable and wanting to go home and saying this to Peeta and seeking comfort from him, Peeta taking care of Katniss properly when she's ill and hurting. And then my favourite bit, and again I get why this was cut, like I wasn't expecting this to be in the film, but I just think it's a nice little scene, is they get sent this like full dinner and they're really hungry, and so they're kind of eating it quite quickly and they start licking their plates, and then they kind of realise that Effie would really disapprove and they start making fun of Effie and being like, "We love you, Effie," and they're like eating with their hands and licking the plate, and it's just like a really nice fun little scene between them, like making light of a situation and this horrible circumstance, and I like just really like that moment. But they kind of cut any light moments because I guess they were like, this is a serious film and we need to get across how serious it is. And don't get me wrong, these films and books are very serious, but they also do have light-hearted moments which I think are important. When they go hunting after kind of the cave sequence, they are much nicer to each other, which I guess they needed to do because they didn't really show as much of a genuine connection in the cave scenes, and so they had to make that up in this scene. Whereas in the book, because you see a lot of that genuine connection in the cave scene, they're very snipey at each other and very kind of bantery and getting annoyed at each other, and I really like it. Like I just think it's like good stuff, and I really enjoy them kind of sniping at each other because it's just quite funny. And again, it shows that they don't think the other is perfect, and they, you know, things about them do annoy each other. Katniss literally will not shut up about how loud Peeta is. Like for a whole chapter she's like, he's so loud, I hate him so much, why is he being so loud? Which I just find really funny. They're teenagers and they're dramatic, been put in this horrible situation, and again I think they kind of don't let them be as dramatic and funny and maybe as teen-like as they are in the books, in the films, and I do miss that. The final showdown in the film is definitely different to the books. In the books it goes on a lot longer, it's a lot more gory, it's a lot more kind of just horrific. The mutts in the book have the tributes' eyes and look like the tributes, and it's quite disturbing to read about, to be honest. And again, I get why a lot of that was cut because of the PG-13 rating, also because, like I said, they crammed the last third of the book into the last half hour of the film, so I get it. One of the big differences within the showdown is that in the book, a mutt, as Peeta is climbing up onto the cornucopia, takes a chunk out of his leg, and then throughout the rest of the showdown he is bleeding out, and at one point Katniss tries to tie a tourniquet, but this is like a thing, this is like a race against time. They have to win and they have to get him to a capital medical person because he is bleeding out and could potentially die from this injury. This doesn't happen in the film. I guess maybe they thought it would be too repetitive because he'd already hurt his leg earlier in the film. Maybe they were like, oh, we don't want him to come across as too weak, which is their own fault because they made that mistake earlier in the film. The whole thing with Peeta, I feel like, is that they make mistakes earlier on in the film and then they have to change things later on in the film to make up for the mistakes they made earlier on in the film, and it's just this whole cycle of messing up his character even more because of things they did before. It's wild. Also, the final confrontation after they announce there can only be one winner at the end after Cato has died is a lot more dramatic in the book, and I think that's just due to circumstances. In the book, like I said, Peeta is like bleeding out, but it's actually Katniss's character that changes in this scene compared to Peeta, and it's her response to it. So in the film, she's quite calm really, and the announcement happens and Peeta is just kind of like, okay, shoot me, go for it. Katniss kind of just looks angry and is like, no, they're not gonna win. And then they hold out the berries and she's like, trust me, and he's like, okay, cool. And then, you know, they barely even get the berries near their mouth at all. Like, they basically like lift their hand an inch and then they're like, stop! And that's it, pretty much. And then the scene just like cuts as a hovercraft is coming down on them, and then you wake up and Katniss is fine in the Capitol. In the book, Katniss is a lot more upset and frantic during this scene. They're talking a lot more, and she's saying, you know, you can't leave me here, you know, you shoot me and go home and live with it, I can't do this. And I think in the book it gets across a lot better the nuance of this scene, in that, you know, it really could be either way. It could be her feelings for Peeta, or it could be her anger at the Capitol, and like the real thing is it's both. Whereas in the film I definitely think it kind of just comes across that Katniss is pissed at the Capitol and none of her feelings for Peeta come across at all towards the end of the film. Like, you don't get the vibe at all that her feelings for Peeta influence this at all, when I would argue they were there. Like, I'm not saying they were the main thing, but they were definitely there. She even says in the book, if she goes home without him, she'll never leave the arena. And again, I think this is because they don't build up their relationship well enough, because they mischaracterize Peeta. So in the book, after the announcement is made, they kind of run to the lake and they get rid of their weapons, and they're trying to make sure that Peeta's leg is okay and that he's not like gonna die before they get up in the hovercraft. They get up in the hovercraft and Peeta is immediately kind of wrenched out of Katniss's arms, and she's holding onto him so tight that she notes that his jacket fabric is still in her hand, and he's wheeled off to the operating theatre to, you know, sort his leg out, and she kind of runs after them and is banging on the glass. And it's a really powerful image of her just like banging on this glass. That kind of thing is just not in the film because, God forbid, Katniss feel upset or frantic at all. And during this scene, something that I love and that I think is a really powerful image is like she sees herself kind of in the glass and she can't recognize herself because she is so like caked in mud and she's dirty and she's bloody. And then a Capitol attendant gives her a glass of orange juice that has, you know, one of the little kind of hats in it, and she just notes how weird it looks in her hand because it's so dirty and, you know, caked in mud and blood, and it's so clean and pristine. I think this section of the book really clearly portrays, like, in terms of, you know, Peeta's character changing and their relationship changing, that Katniss actually does genuinely feel things for Peeta. I think that's the part of the book where you see actually she has developed real feelings for him, and she's just very cold to him in the film. Like, I really could watch it, I think, if I hadn't read the books and like just think, oh, she doesn't like him at all. Jumping off of that scene, I would argue that the biggest change of Peeta's character from the book to the film is that in the book he loses a leg. In the film there is nothing about Peeta losing a leg at all. Like, it's just not a thing. It doesn't happen ever. And in the book, Peeta, if you haven't read them, he loses a leg. His leg is amputated, I think, from the knee down, and he is an amputee for the rest of the series. It's just something that would have been so easy to have just put in dialogue. They didn't even necessarily have to show it. They could have just put it in some dialogue, and they didn't. And it would have been a couple lines. It could have been, you know, just a shot. Like, it didn't have to be really a big deal, and they just completely cut it. And to erase the fact that this, you know, male love interest who is disabled, to just erase his disability is like really anger inducing. And I just think it's like one of the worst things about the way they treat Peeta's character in the first film is that they erase the fact that he becomes an amputee, and they erase his disability in the preceding films. And finally, for my scene by scene playback, I know this has gone on forever, there's a scene cut at the end of the film. The end of the film in general is very, very rushed compared to the book. It's not like much in the book, but everything feels kind of explained and it's paced properly, and you go through all the interviews and scene by scene. And the end of the film is very, very rushed. Again, because it had to be crammed into the last half an hour. In the book, when Katniss and Peeta are on the train back, they have to make a pit stop somewhere, and they all get off the train for some fresh air. Katniss and Peeta go for a walk, and he gets her some wildflowers, and then Haymitch basically passes them by and makes a comment about Katniss not having to act soon. And this starts off a whole discussion between them about, you know, was it all for the games? Are your feelings legitimate? And Peeta says, you know, it was all for the games, how you acted. And he gets upset, and he can't really look at her anymore, and is just like, well, I'm done here, like, I don't want to talk about this anymore. And Katniss is clearly upset about this because she doesn't know how she feels, because she's like thinking about a lot of things, because she knows at this point that their actions have angered the Capitol. Peeta doesn't know at this point this. He doesn't find this out till Catching Fire. She's clearly feeling a lot of things, but I think it's really clear at the end of the book that Katniss is very worried about this growing rebellion situation, and she's angry at the Capitol for what happened, but she also like does legitimately have feelings for him. I gotta get my book out for this, but the literal last line of the book is, I take his hand, holding on tightly, preparing for the cameras and dreading the moment when I will finally have to let go. Like, yeah. Again, like I said, Katniss is a complex character. Peeta is a complex character. They can hold many feelings in their bodies, and the movies definitely kind of streamline that and make that a lot smaller. The only really parallel scene for this in the film is when they're on the train, and it's a couple of lines, and Peeta just turns to Katniss and is like,
So what happens when we get back?
I don't know. I guess we try to forget.
I don't want to forget.
and again, he doesn't confront her properly. He doesn't get angry and frustrated the way he does in the book. They don't allow Peeta to be an angry or frustrated person. They constantly just want him to like look at her with sad puppy eyes, and it's really frustrating because that's not who he is. So those are pretty much all of the scenes that I want to talk about. I know that was really long. If you have sat through this whole video, God bless you. Overall, I think that these changes are small, and I know I'm being petty picking them out, but I think when added all together, they do overall just make Peeta a less interesting, less complex character. In the film, he is sweet, he's kind, he's gentle, a little bit stalkery, quite doe-eyed, and just generally goes along with whatever Katniss says. In the books, he is sweet and gentle and kind, and those are character traits that he possesses, but he's also really cynical about the Capitol, and he also gets really angry about the situation that he's in and the way that the Capitol are going about things and the way that Katniss is going about things and how Katniss is treating him at points. And although it's clear that he adores Katniss, he still challenges her when he disagrees with her on things, and he challenges her point of view on things, and I think that that's really important and shows that although he does have a crush on her, it's not this unhealthy like obsession idolization of her. It's a healthy crush where he sees that she's a human being that has flaws. And because those parts of him are taken out and those scenes are taken out, Katniss and Peeta's relationship dynamic changes. It doesn't feel as dynamic, it doesn't feel as interesting, and thus Katniss doesn't take to him the way that she does in the book, which in my opinion makes the climax of the film and the narrative of the film suffer because, as I've said, I do think that their relationship is important to the plot of this film and the subsequent films. Again, would like to clarify here, I don't think it is the most important relationship in the film. That is obviously Katniss and Prim, but it is a very important relationship within the story. I do really think that in the subsequent films they really tried to save it. I think in Catching Fire, Peeta is a lot better. He's a lot more funny, he's snarky, he gets angry, he challenges Katniss, he visibly gets annoyed at her at points, and he is really smart, and you show his kind of cunning and manipulation a lot more. And the Catching Fire film has definitely cut a lot of scenes that are in the book between Katniss and Peeta, but I think those are understandable. Those were a lot more of their bonding scenes, which I think make their relationship in the book a lot stronger, but they still do hold up pretty well in the film. I wouldn't argue as well. I think there's definitely like the part in the middle that's cut out, and it does feel like their relationship jumps from kind of friendship to actually being in love a bit quickly. But my problem in general with this is that by Catching Fire, Peeta is a lot less snarky and funny and charming and witty because he's traumatized by this story. He is really suffering from PTSD and he is trying to work through that, and he's just a lot more withdrawn. And also by this point, because he doesn't think Katniss's feelings are real, he's a lot less flirty. He definitely holds himself back a lot more in scenes with Katniss because he doesn't want to make her uncomfortable because he doesn't think that she likes him in that way. And then obviously by Mockingjay, we're not going to talk about that, you will know, but I do think that Josh does a great job with his character in Mockingjay, but yeah. Anyway, that is everything I have to say on this topic. This was an essay. If you made it through this, God bless you. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. I don't know if I articulated this well at all, so I'm really sorry if this was just a big rambling mess, but I've been wanting to make this video for a while, and having just read the book and watched the film back to back, I felt like now was the perfect time to do it. I hope you're all having a great day wherever you are, and I will hopefully see you in my next video, which will hopefully not be as ridiculous as this video. Bye!